$3.25. Got that back to the office, and it turns out it's missing a tool that allows it to be cleaned. So I went back to the Goodwill and bought a citrus juicer for about $3 or $5. So we had freshly squeezed mandarin orange juice yesterday, as well as this morning when some of the public works guys came through, and some dragon fruit, because they had that last night when I went by. So we've been having a fruit tour of the world.
That sounds yummy.
Food happens a lot at your place, Laurel.
We're all very good at it. Ooh.
What?
Or some kind of echo.
Okay, I sent an email.
Does someone have two devices open? Because I think it's oh, there's Tammy Beard. I think there's an echo.
If you have both your phone and your computer going, it will get an echo.
I'm going to turn it off.
Yeah, Lisa.
That's better, right?
I believe we're at 7 people now.
We are.
No, I can't hear. Wonderful. I don't know what's wrong. I can't hear.
We can hear you.
Do we have a quorum?
We do now.
Yes, but I don't think Lisa can hear.
Lisa can't hear us.
I sent a message and I don't know.
Yeah, so this is Rachel. Lisa sent me a message that she's rejoining to get her audio to work. So maybe just hold tight for a minute or two.
We have 2 phone guests.
What about in Fairfax County, Kate? What's going on in Fairfax County besides the imminent retirement of Gary Scott and the imminent arrival of
Scott Kostasek? Yes. Do you know Scott?
No, but I've sent him a Facebook friend request in anticipation of getting to know him.
Oh, good. Well, it seems like a lot of people do. Scott's from Contra Costa, California, whose demographics are exactly Fairfax's. Same general number of registered voters, almost the same demographic percentage, same size, same general financial. We have a little higher household income, but not noticeably. So we're pretty excited about being able to address the overwhelming size issues that we now have. Dealing, you know, an 11,000. We have on our rolls now 10,000 election officials. So that keeps us busy.
Yeah.
And we have, like many people, a town election. You know, one of the things, Walt, that you've asked that I don't think we've focused on for counties is that they're going to have to think about when they have town elections in November to be sure their they have precincts that exactly match the towns. We have one that doesn't. Clifton, the town of Clifton is in our Clifton precinct. And it's probably too small to be a precinct. We're gonna have to try anyway, because the town's real little and Clifton's real big. So that's a whole set of issues for counties that they haven't had before, because they haven't had to print presidential ballots and congressional ballots and local all kinds of ballots in November. With right now, because Herndon is in November, we have 11th district and 11th district Herndon, but we're going to 10th district and 10th district Clifton and all of that. So the counties, one of them has 23 towns. Prince William I believe, has 7 or something, so does Loudon. So that's going to be a whole different set of issues for counties. Cities won't have it, but counties.
Yeah, Wise County has 5 towns
Yeah.
whose precinct boundaries don't match our our precinct boundaries. So we've got 5 towns that'll have to move to November. It's
So your
it's an
precinct lines are going to have to change. Yeah. Well,
there's
they don't have to, but you'll end up with split precincts, which are now illegal.
yeah, there's a significant challenge with no clear answer yet on that. That's something that we've talked to the Department of Elections about over VRAF. Because, there's split precincts are prohibited, yet we also passed this law that now makes a whole new set of split precincts where towns exist. So fun times never end.
I think Lisa's ready.
Can Lisa hear us?
We can't hear her.
She's muted. Lisa, you're muted. Lisa's on the phone with somebody. Barbara Tabb joined us, so we now have our secretary.
Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I had a conflict this morning.
And welcome aboard, Ms. Beard.
Has Tammy Beard joined us? She's not on my screen. That's
I
annoying.
think so.
She was on.
I think she's muted. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I couldn't find the unmute button.
Oh,
Hi, Tammy. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
she's decided to join us down the rabbit hole.
Is there
Yes,
some
absolutely.
way on the WebEx to pin our committee members to our screen so that we don't see people who aren't committee members? We can actually see the committee members, because it seems to be just
Yes.
Can you hear me
If you-
now?
I can't see it.
You can hear me now, but I'm getting myself,
I can hear you.
I don't know a way around it.
You what?
Wait, because if I hang up, I won't be able to hear anyone else.
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, welcome, everybody. I'm sorry for technical problems. First, we do have a quorum. And Barbara Tabb will be just joining us. Another member will join us soon. I would like to welcome Tammy Beard. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning. My name is Tammy Beard, and I live in Henrico County. And I've been working in elections for the last few years as an officer of election, managed a political campaign. I'm currently the assistant chief of the Henrico CAT. So I survived through the November election with all of those absentee envelopes. So I love elections, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you guys.
Great. Well, thank you and welcome. Welcome to you again. The first thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes of February 18th. These minutes were approved pending amendment. You should have received the final version. And Barbara Tabb has drafted the March minutes, and we will circulate those and approve them at the next meeting in May. You all have copies of a copy of the draft bylaws. Those were circulated. Okay.
Lisa.
I would like a motion to adopt the bylaws. And then we can discuss them if there are further changes, but I'd like a motion to adopt in a second. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to adopt the bylaws, Lisa, but I have a question. We were sent 2 copies and I'm not sure which copy we're talking about. We were sent 2 drafts in that giant email.
There's one that should have come in as April 7th.
No, they both came on the same email. I only pulled stuff off one email. I have, the first copy was Advisory Work Group copy, and the second copy is, that says the Virginia State Board of Elections. It's not in bold. Those things aren't in bold. They may be the same. But under Article 5, on one copy, there are only 3 lines, and on the other, there are 5 items. And on Article 4, there are 3 on one and 2 on the other. Is anyone else having difficulty understanding why we have 2 sets? I printed both sets off.
Okay, Allison, there were 8 different attachments to that email that you're
Yes.
talking about. And I'm not real clear on which one we're supposed to be looking at. It looks like there were 2 Word documents attached. One of them is called Draft Advisory Review Workgroup Bylaws Draft 4/7/2021. And the other one was named AR Workgroup Draft Bylaws 3/2020.
I've got,
I would assume that most recent is the one Lisa would like us to look at.
Yes.
But I'm not
Which-
100% clear
I
why we
don't know
received.
which one's the most recent. Is anybody
Yeah.
looking at it? And then I can tell you which I'll move.
I assume it's the one dated April 7th, because there's one that
Yes.
says Advisory Review Workgroup Bylaws Draft 4/7/21, and then AR Workgroup Draft Bylaws 3/10/2020. I assume, I disregarded the 3/10/2020, and I looked at the 4/7/21. So that's the one
That's right.
So which one is that? Is that the one with Article 5?
Yeah, we're looking at the one,
Article 5 meetings, is that what you're looking at, Kate?
I'm looking at both of them. One of them has, one Article 5 has 5 items under it, one has 3.
Okay, I'm looking at the one dated 4/7.
When you print it out, it's not dated. There's no dates on them at all.
The one with 4/7/21, Kate,
Has,
has Article 5, and then it has 5 items underneath it, and then it has Article 6.
yes.
Right, that's the most recent one? Then
And
is that what
Believe
you're
so,
saying?
yes.
And I would
Okay.
make a recommendation to the work group, to anyone who is producing
Yes.
documents, that you should always date in
Yes,
footer the date that you created the document.
on the, yeah,
Because once you print them, if there's no date, this
when you
is-
print them, there's no date, they're useless. I didn't realize that they were that different.
it's the one that says Article 5 meetings.
Yeah, that's the way that Kate used to differentiate them, because once you
Yes.
print 2 documents, there was no way to know which one was dated 4/7 and which one wasn't. Was there a reason, Lisa, that we got a set of bylaws that were dated March of 2020? Was there something you wanted us to do with those?
No,
Okay,
that was simply attached, those were attached to Barbara's minutes from the meeting last year. That's all that was.
okay. Okay, so we can just disregard that attachment.
Okay, so
Okay.
I will move the most recent one with, for purposes of differentiation, with 5 items under Article 5 and 1 under Article 6, which says, although the other one had an Article 6 also, that was the expiration date on our can of food here. So I will move that one, the most recent one.
Okay, second?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, does anyone have any comments, questions?
Well, the only thing that I would say about the one that, the first one, is that was a comment that the secretary could rotate, and now we're moving that the work group shall designate a member to serve as secretary. That's the only difference. If we care about rotating, I think Barbara's probably the permanent secretary for life, so Barbara's probably muted, so she can't shriek back at me.
I'm shrieking. No. No.
Anyway, also move, whatever.
Yeah, my feeling was that because we could designate, we can change the designation at any time.
Okay,
So there's no term announced for the secretary.
right.
Lisa, did you want to call a vote, or was a motion and a second sufficient for adoption?
I call the question.
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Can someone send out the correct version so that I know I have the correct version? I'm a little confused on the version, so.
Joanne, on the email that Lisa sent with the 8
Yeah.
attached,
Yeah,
you're looking for the Word document with the draft bylaws dated
Yeah,
7/2021. You can disregard the other older bylaws.
okay, I have one that doesn't have a date on it. That's not the correct one? The very last one on the list is the one I was looking at, so.
The last one on the list, I think, is the one that, no.
That's the old one, the incorrect one.
So which is the correct one?
The second attachment called Advisory Review Workgroup
Oh,
Bylaw
okay.
7/21.
Okay, good. I
I'll
got you.
pull it out real quick and send it to everybody, the one that we're talking about.
Thank you, Barbara.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Did we ever vote on the vote? No, did we have nay votes on this?
No,
Or any neighbor.
does anybody want to take a nay vote? Okay, and if you are on but are not, your video isn't on, could you use, let's see, the chat? Or is there a reactions? Yes, you could do a thumbs up, thumbs down, or raise hand to indicate a vote. Okay, so that motion passes. The bylaws have been adopted. I asked the chairman what he wanted in terms of a finished product by October. And I had also discussed previously, both with Chairman Brink and Commissioner Piper, the purpose of the study. And they felt that the purpose of developing benchmarks is to see where there can be improvements in the election process. In certain other states, notably New Mexico, elections officials routinely collect data election after election to learn how to improve their elections. We can research how they do this, but of course we have to tailor our research in terms of elections in Virginia because there could well be differences. But we would set the measures and identify the kinds of data that should be collected and analyzed. And I asked Jackie if she would come up with something of a framework. Did everyone receive Jackie's memo, which we circulated?
No.
No.
It was in that large email.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is it the one with the charts and the boxes and graphs and stuff?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. It's memo to Elections Advisory Board Workgroup, 2021-0406. And I can share that on the screen.
And then the headline says potential framework for the project. Got it.
Yes.
I had no idea what that was.
Okay, well, in that case, Jackie, you're sharing your screen. Could you just walk us through it quickly then?
Yes, so I need to know if you can see the document that has 2 blue boxes and 2 orange boxes on top.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right, so at the last meeting, we were discussing the types of things that could be measured. And there were some great ideas, a lot of things that were brainstormed during that discussion. So when we're thinking about this, we need to think about elections as a process, actually, as you well know, a series of connected processes. So if we approach it from that respect, is what needs to happen in each of the processes? What sort of outcomes do you want? That's not me.
It's me.
Okay, somebody needs to mute. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're looking at this as a process, and there are customers in processes, you know, the people who receive an output, and there are outcomes from processes, like a successful election, however you define that. So a framework for this is to have that process outcome sort of thinking. Okay, so the diagram that you see with it is just a very, very simple flow chart. So what we can do as a group is to start by defining the voter's desired election experience. And we started that last week. There was Walt had a suggestion that you see in italics under the first blue box, that a successful election is accessible, efficient, transparent, and managed with integrity so that people have confidence in it. And you can decide to, you know, to adjust that particular statement. But if we start at the end, what you want to achieve, the outcome you want to achieve, then we can figure out what to measure, how to measure that outcome. How do you measure accessibility, efficiency, transparency? We can figure out how to measure those things, or perhaps just most of those things. But then you can back up. So you start by defining what is it that voters want in terms of having a good election experience. And then you develop the outcome measures for that, which is the second box. Try to define those outcomes specifically. How do we measure those? And then you move upstream and say, well, there's a process or a set of processes that produce or that contribute to the production of that outcome. So what are those processes, and what are the factors in those processes that impact those voters' experiences and outcomes? And then you can develop those upstream measures for the factors in the processes or the processes as a whole. So we start with the end, what you want to accomplish, what, you know, for those voters, and then we move upstream and say, well, what do we have to measure to have confidence that we're going to be able, that the election process is going to be able to produce that outcome? In quality management language, we call that having the process be capable of producing the desired outcome. So we come up with what we call capability measures. All right, so that's the first part of this. There are many different ways we can go about developing measures. Okay, lots of different approaches. So I just listed some here for your consideration. You will have to decide what you most want to do, and I will help you all the way through. But the first one, we've already talked about. You start with the end result in mind. What is it you want to achieve? So for example, if the voter wants integrity, if that's an outcome, you might have to survey voters. The survey is not the measure. The survey is just the means to get data for a particular measure. So the measure might be the percentage of voters who were satisfied or highly satisfied that the voting process had integrity. There could be a question on a survey about that. Okay, it's subjective, but it's the voice of the voter that you're receiving in that sort of a measure. So this would be, this is the measure, what I've highlighted. Let me make this a little larger. I know some of you are following along. So this is actually the measure, the percentage of voters who were satisfied or highly satisfied that the voting process had integrity. That particular measure would require a survey. But again, you're getting the voice. So that's an example. There were many different perspectives that were discussed in the last meeting about what makes an election successful. The perspective of the voter, the perspective of the general registrar, the perspective of the local electoral board members, candidates. So we listed, brainstormed some of those in the last meeting. So it's good to go back to that and say, are there some measures in there? And measures that might align up here or up here. So that's good. Another thing is just to break down the process. It's an elections process that's kind of huge. So how do we break it down? And of course, you're the experts in that. So you've got various candidate processes. You have voter registration processes. You have election preparation processes. You have the canvass. So all sorts of processes. And then you can say which processes are most critical to achieving the outcome or outcomes that you want, and how can we measure whether those processes are working the way that you want them to work. Again, moving upstream, this relates, it's what processes most impact the voters' experiences. So you can look at the effectiveness of a process or the efficiency of a process. You can also look at the degree to which a process has an effect on how the voter feels about the experience. So you can have a very efficient voter registration process that might not be real connected to the outcome of how the voter felt on election day. But so again, we're looking at process and outcome. So in this case, if the voter, again, if the voter wanted integrity in elections, which we had up here, that's an outcome, then an upstream measure that could impact that would be a measure that was actually used that we saw in a report, which was the percentage of localities that tested all voting machines for logic and accuracy prior to their use. So if we can measure that, then we know that people, general registrars of local electoral boards are taking the appropriate action, have evidence that they've taken the appropriate action to make sure those voting machines are tested and ready to go on election day. And that is something that could impact that voter's perception of integrity. So that's how we make the connection between an upstream process and what we could measure in it, and how that could impact downstream the voters' perceptions about the election. Another thing you can do is just think chronologically. Just look at the whole series of events that lead up to election, all zillion of them that I know that you folks work very hard on. So what are sort of the milestones that occur from candidates filing their paperwork and voters registering to, you know, getting the ballots ready? What are those key milestones along the way, which could be considered outcomes? And in what sequence do they occur? Because if you think chronologically, if something goes wrong early and it could affect something downstream, then you've got that negative domino effect. So what's most critical upstream in terms of the timing of things that you think you should put a measure on in order to monitor that? And then I just put, you know, just steal shamelessly from other people, right? With their permission. Lisa talked about a book, a handbook of methods and standards. There could be other ones that perhaps someone will introduce today. But look at, you know, this is just about doing research. What are other states measuring? What are the various localities in Virginia measuring? What can we learn from each other that would be helpful to the creation of solid measures? And then just, so that is all about the different ways we can approach developing measures. And some might be more logical to you or more comfortable to you. Whichever you choose, I'll be here to help. Once you've figured out as a group what you think you should measure, then there are some things that we have to keep in the back of our mind. And this is where I will definitely provide a lot of assistance. Once you've decided on a measure, we've got to figure out a lot of things about the measure. What kind of a measure is it? I think that's something we would document. This is a downstream measure, like measuring the impact, or it's upstream. So there are different types of measures. We've got the outcome measures, the process measures. We have volumes. You can just do counts, like the number of voter registration applications received. That's an input measure that is counted. The number of voter address changes processed, that would be an output. And that's measured in a count. That might be great at a local level, might not be as valuable, or it might be equally valuable at a state level. We can look at efficiency, which is generally an output divided by input sort of measure often measured in time or money increments. So these are types of measures. Okay, they come in different flavors, just like ice cream. They can be qualitative or quantitative. But once we figured out what you want to measure, the type of measure it is, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, then we have to figure out how to collect the data. And that's who collects it, how frequently is it collected, is it to whom is it sent, how do you compile it, all sorts of things. So we've got the data, then we have a calculation method. How do you actually calculate? If you're just counting, it's a count. But if it's an efficiency measure, you might have to do some division or calculate a percentage. If a lot of different people, like all the localities, are going to be contributing to an overall state measure, then you've got to make sure everyone is trained on the data collection method and the calculation method so that everyone does it the same way. And you have to figure out the reporting format and frequency. Is this going to be a number that gets reported every quarter? Is it a number, a percentage that gets reported perhaps after every election? Or is it something else? Is something that goes on a line graph over time so we can see changes, we can see improvements or degradations in performance? So we've got to figure out how we're going to actually report that measure and how frequently. I know the issue of standards came up last week. A standard would be the desired result. We don't even get to that until you figure out if you have a measure and whether you can collect the data. Typically, if you're going to set a standard, what the desired result should be, there are various ways to do that. My recommendation would be that we see what the actual data tell us, because that will tell us, you know, is the measure we're getting, the data from the measure we're getting, is it telling us a good story? But we want to get even better. Is it telling us a not so good story? And we need to set some sort of standard and really push to try to make an improvement to that standard. We don't want a standard to be arbitrary. There may be standards written into law or regulations that I'm unaware of, but you would be aware of. And there could be standards that other states are using that seem to work for them that we could examine. But we don't start here. Don't start with, we want X, you know, thus in such a process to be, you know, 95% effective. And then we measure it the first time and find out we're at 60%. Well, then we have to improve the process to come even close to the 95%. So this is one of the final things we do. And lastly, I would just measure that not everything can be measured. Okay, so when we're looking at what you want to measure, start there. Don't let the fact that it might not be able to be measured get in the way. We'll put it down and we'll have discussions about whether it's possible to measure it. And possible in that, you know, can we even collect the data? What would be involved in collecting the data? What is the cost of collecting the data? So not everything that you may want to measure is necessarily going to be possible to measure, and that's okay. That's normal in the world of measurement. So these are just some things to think about, different ways we can develop measures, and then once you figure out what you want to measure, the other things we need to do to turn your idea about a measure into an actual measure. And that's the end of my 2 pages.
Does anyone have any questions for Jackie? Any comments? Does anyone have any experience to share in terms of doing studies or collecting data of this sort?
My thought after hearing this is I appreciate all of your work, Jackie. And I think that our job will be made a lot easier if we piggyback on what other states have done. I think we'll be here for a year or two if we all just try to, you know, manufacture these ourselves. And I think that's kind of pointless. I think, like Franklin Roosevelt said, or someone, you know, the states are the laboratories of democracy, and I don't see any point in us completely inventing this here. So my suggestion is, instead of us trying to figure out measures, is we figure out, you know, like the definition of success, like our goal, and then we take the we get to do a survey of other states or other sources of measures, and see what they have, and then figure out, are they usable in Virginia? Where do they fit with our goals, like as far as enhancing measuring accessibility, transparency, and so on. And then come up with ones that are feasible in Virginia. And I'm not even sure that we necessarily say these are the standards. We could give the state board, we could say, here are these measures, we've looked at them, we've sifted them, we've surveyed them, and these are ones that you can choose from as a menu of measures to accomplish these goals. And we suggest you look at these every year to determine if they need to be tinkered with, added to, deleted. But I'd say we just survey and provide the results of our survey and sifting for the state board to analyze. And I think that Jackie's provided a good framework. I don't think that we have to spend all of our time spinning our wheels coming up with the measures themselves.
I mean, I
Okay.
think
Kate?
that this is Allison.
Oh, okay, Allison. Kate, after you, Kate can talk. Yes.
You know, this is one of the things that the benchmark work group worked on was what are the things that we need to measure? What are the tasks incumbent upon election officials to ensure successful election? And the Code of Virginia pretty much gives us our steps in order to conduct an election. There's a very clear start time and there's a very clear ending time for an election. I mean, it starts and it ends, and those are clearly defined in the code. And, to go back to what Jackie presented here, the very first thing here is define the voter's desired election experience. Well, the voter's desired election experience is to vote, and to vote easily and conveniently. And, that is what is incumbent upon all of us as election officials, is to give a voter who chooses to vote the opportunity to vote conveniently when they want to. I mean, we have three options for voting in Virginia. For a full 45 days, you can get a by-mail ballot, vote early in person, or you can wait till election day and vote in your precinct. And we have to make that easy and accessible to the voter. And that, that's a pretty simple definition of what's incumbent upon us as election officials. And what's a successful election is, did voters get to vote? Was it easy and accessible for voters to vote? And that's it, period. And the Code of Virginia gives us the stepping stones about how to conduct an election. LNA testing, opening your polling places on time, opening your early voting centers by 45 days, providing by-mail ballots in a timely manner, certifying the election on time. I mean, these are the stepping stones. We don't really need to go too far beyond what are, the code given requirements for conducting the election and measuring what a successful election is.
And the examples, Allison, that you just gave when you said stepping stones, that was really a good term. That's what I was talking about with the upstream measures, right? That have a direct impact on the outcome, and the outcomes, as you described, be able to vote easily and conveniently. So.
Okay, Jackie, could you stop screen sharing on this for a moment? Because it's hard to see everyone and hear everyone.
Hi.
Kate, did you have a comment?
Kim, this is Kim Cummings. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I had
yes,
a comment, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. Okay, I'm here. So I guess I was a bit confused. I was thinking that the survey was for us to get a baseline on whether our citizens were having that experience, and then using that information to make sure we shore up places where it's not going well, right? So we have our standards. Now we're asking the public what their experience is, and based on that, then we have to make sure that everyone has the proper experience. But we don't know what we need to work on unless we get the input from the community to know what's not working in which areas, right? So that's what I thought the survey was, and that was the data that we were collecting to figure out how we make those improvements to make sure that everyone has a successful experience. So am I off I just correct me if I'm off target or if we're supposed to be doing something else.
Okay, Kate, yes.
It's muted. Kate, you're
Yeah.
muted.
I'm sorry, it's rare that I want to follow up on what Allison said that I think is the first thing that we should do, because that we're judged by the state law standards no matter what on whether we were successful or not. Did we return an absentee ballot within the length of time after somebody applied? There are all kinds of deadlines for that. Did we return a registration? Did we tell people they'd been denied? There are all those kinds of things that already have timeframes in them in the code. And I think we should get those. Those are there. And if we didn't do those, it's not probably going to be very successful. So did everybody vote open on time? If the answer is no, somebody was left standing in a line with an unopened precinct. So there are a whole bunch of those pre-processing, a whole bunch of things. And that one's not as clear, but did we pre-process, and when were we done with everything that came in by election day, that sort of thing. There are a whole bunch of things like that if we do, that are already there. And I think that we should separate those out, which are required. And if we don't meet them, we're in trouble with the law. And if we don't meet them, here's another one that, hang on, Joanne, here's another one that doesn't quite have a deadline, is printing of ballots. If we can't get the ballots printed on time to mail them out by the 45th day, if we can't get them approved, that's another one. So there's some very clear ones. Then I think we can work with the surveys and the more intangible ones. If we get the tangible ones, we have to meet down on a list first and build around it. Those are the stepping stones, as somebody said, but there are things in between. One of the things that's not in there is a line length. Is how long should you have to wait anywhere? There are all kinds of things out there that say you shouldn't have to wait more than half an hour. The various in the ether, in the literature. But let's get down what we know that we have to do. And I think that's not very hard. We all can come up with a list pretty quickly and put it together. Then survey people to see if we did it. If they stood in line for an hour and a half. I know a couple of 100,000 that did.
Okay, yes, Joanne.
Okay, I think we're coming up with some really good ideas about actual specific things that we can do, but I think we're kind of dancing around this one thing, which is the voter perception of whether the experience was legitimate. Like, he had an easy time voting, but did his vote really count correctly? And I think that's one of the things that there's a lot of concern about these days. And I think that, that's a really difficult thing to measure because it's a subjective thing. So I don't know where we want to go with that.
Lisa?
Well,
Allison, you wanted to speak?
Allison. No, to Joanne's point, I think that's part of this is part of voter perception, is if we can create definitive proof that here are the requirements, here are the stepping stones to conducting a successful election from start to finish. And then that kind of information, I mean, I foresee a lot of this type of thing actually gets published, like, certification that all 133 localities completed a thorough, adequate, accurate LNA testing. All 133 localities opened early voting on time. All 133 localities conducted early voting with no more than half an hour wait times. That is all going to shore up voter perception that everything is run accurately. I mean, part of, not that we're not transparent, but the more transparency that is in the system, that voters can see how things truly work, how they happen, lends itself to voter confidence. And while I'm not saying that we're not transparent, because I think we are transparent, I think sometimes it's hard to know where to look to see what it is we are doing. So, I mean, I think it lends itself to shoring up a voter's perception of how all of this works once they can see that, you know, there is pre-election testing, you know, people are being, are conducting the election in accordance with law. These are the requirements, and this is what my local registrar is doing.
So we're really talking, I mean, we're talking about public education and not after the fact, but before the fact.
All during the fact. I mean,
And all during the fact, of course, yeah.
real time, you know,
Well,
eventually.
But
I want,
this information has to get to the public somehow, that all this information that we're collecting has to get to the public somehow.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully the Department of Elections will
Yes.
have it on the state, on the state website that, you know, shows. I mean, and we as leadership, Joanne, you will remember, we have talked to Commissioner Piper about our very real need to publish in real time the things that happen through an election. Like, while the post-election report is fantastic, a lot of information could be made available in real time. It should not be months after the election that, you know, that it gets reported. It should be in real time that, you know, all 133 localities completed testing on time with a 0% error rate or something. You know, that could be out there way before the election.
Well,
I don't know if Kate was getting at this when she was adding her comments, but I think one of the, when we're doing these, we need to remember too, like she mentioned, getting ballots printed on time. Well, part of that is actually having the names for the ballots. Don't judge us for not getting the ballots printed on time
Exactly.
when we've had lawsuits going up until a week before absentee voting starts.
Exactly.
Because we're not going to have the ballots on time to start absentee voting because we've got to do testing. They don't magically appear. There are no ballot elves. And if you want to start voting on time, you've got to do everything ready to get ready in time, because magic is not part of this process. And so don't look at me and say, hey, y'all didn't have your ballots on time. You should, if only you were better looking. Nope.
no, wait,
The
what do you
ballots have to be, the ballot information has to be available from the state. Oh, there's Kate with her magic hat. So the ballot information has to be available from the state. And if they get dinged because, and I'm not saying the department or anything like that, but if we start saying, hey, the state's not getting us this information, this standard's not being met, then the General Assembly can say, oh, wow, you know, this standard's not being met. Maybe we need to move the deadline back, or not have like 5,000 sheets of paper, and I'm being sarcastic, you know, I'm being ridiculous there, but it's making the point, to make a filing to get on the ballot. This could be a lot more streamlined than it is, and it would be simpler, and that's how we could, you know, have still some of the processes we have and still get our ballots ready on time. But don't ding localities for not being ready when the information is coming from somewhere else.
But I think that's to the point of the stepping stones, that we have deadlines without understanding the things that have to happen before we meet them. And the public certainly doesn't. So yes, Walt, I agree with you 100%. You can't judge the result if the stepping stones are invisible to get to the result.
Jason? Jason,
I
did you have
got
a
two.
comment?
Yes, ma'am. I got two things. The first is with voter perception. Where we're going to get bit bad is going to be these hot topic issues. 4 years ago, it was technology and people hacking your voting system. I didn't hear a bleep about that this year. The new hot topic was, you name it, the election being stolen, and this. That's where we're going to find a lot of pushback. Is we're going to be prepared for hacking now, where the state has done a great job with it, and now you hear nothing about it. That has just gone by the wayside. So whatever the new hot topic issue is, that's going to need to be one of our topics that we need to prepare for, because they come fast and furious and they go away just as quickly. The other thing with deadlines is we need to shore up something in the code that makes a deadline and not this arbitrary stinking number where somebody can go, oh, it's a deadline, but I'm going to give you 10 extra days. We need to shore up deadlines, like Walt said, and make them deadlines. Because we have deadlines for everything else in our life. Elections should be no exception.
Well, there definitely needs to be clarity in A point that I wanted to make right away here is that this is a 360-degree study. We've talked about elections being conducted by localities, but we've also drawn in the fact that the state has to provide information as well as oversight. I mean, the state says it's supposed to provide uniformity in elections and competence, and the words in our resolution that formed us are, talking about legality and purity and all of that. But the state also has tasks to perform. And we are also charged with evaluating how the Department of Elections performs and the state board. An observation that I've made to the chair, and I think should be rectified, is that we do not have any membership in our work group from the Department of Elections. We should probably have a representative. I mean, Jackie is a consultant to elect, but she's not a member of the work group as a voting member. And so I think that we should probably have some representation. In addition, I wanted to talk a little bit about methodology here. And even before I get to that, I did an informal poll within the League of Women Voters, figuring, we're voters and not all of the people who were polled were women, on what are the criteria for a successful election. And you've touched on most of them. But I'd like to run down this list of 10 things pretty quickly. First, state policies must be clear and well communicated. The process of voting has to be straightforward. Voters have to be educated to know what they need to do when they go to vote, so that it's not confusing for them. Also, election officials have to communicate clearly in advance. For example, if you have a last-minute change of a polling place, there needs to be sufficient notice given to the voters so that they don't get baffled by when they show up and it's closed. Obviously, voters should not confront obstacles or confusing procedures. Election officials and election officers have to be resilient, responding well to exigent circumstances and having backup plans, such as a long line, if machines break down, might not be a symptom of a poorly executed election if the workers can adapt and resolve the problem rapidly. Election officers, obviously, going along with that, have to be well trained and properly follow procedures. The chain of custody of the ballots has to be secure and well documented, which would also lead to voter confidence. The ballots have to be counted timely. The results must be ironclad. Another way of putting that is that the outcomes are accurate and that voters trust those outcomes. The post-election process has to be clear and well communicated. If there's any unexpected activity, it could cause alarm bells to ring. And the 10th is elections are audited, including logic and accuracy testing and post-election audits of paper ballots. And that's another thing that should point to voter confidence in the outcome. I know that the post-election report includes complaints. That's something that we should look at to see where the complaints have been lodged, what it is that people are confused about. I think that this past election isn't necessarily any kind of predictor for the future because of the pandemic and the very rapid, overwhelmingly rapid shift to early voting and mail voting. But we need to know, be aware of all of these things. And Jason, I think your point is well taken about being prepared for the next thing that'll come up. And a lot of that has to do with communication, both at the local level and at the state level, in order to handle things that are being thrown at you. You've got to have a really good response that just plain calms things down. So with regard to methodology, I made a phone call to a professor named Charles Stewart at MIT, who annually does a nationwide election performance index. And I asked him a little bit about methodology. He is willing to come and talk to us. He did a study I don't know, in 2009 or something for Virginia on long lines. And so he says he has a soft spot in his heart for Virginia and wants to help us if he can. He follows a process that was developed by a woman named Heather Gerken. She does an election index, and the other schools, which is kind of like a ranking, like US News rankings of colleges. And so they do the nationwide study. He said he'd get me the methodology, and he hasn't done it yet. So I'll have to kind of poke him and get that for his nationwide election performance index. And then Lana Atkinson is a professor at the University of New Mexico who came up with her focus is constant monitoring with a comprehensive view of the system, and the focus being on improving and fixing problems. And we can probably get her to explain her methodology and what she looks at also. Would anyone be interested in speaking with them, or should they come and speak to all of us at our next meeting? Or can we have sort of subgroups that simply communicate directly with them to get their information to share? Any thoughts, anybody?
If we do create a subgroup, that it would definitely make sense for me and Barbara Tab to be key on that, on a subgroup. And I think it's absolutely fine if they want to come and talk to the whole work group. I think we had discussed possibly not doing any kind of subgroups and meeting as a full body all the time. So it'd probably be best to have them come and address the whole body as opposed to dividing out. I see Kate nodding her head. That would be my recommendation, is if you want us to hear from these people, then just bring them to the whole group and we can hear from them.
Okay.
Along those lines, I have a question about the stuff that you read from the League of Women Voters, and I greatly appreciate the League of Women Voters, that they do an awful lot to help with voter education and support elections in Virginia. But was there some perception that the things that they outlined for a successful election are not being done? Because the list of things you read are things that we are absolutely doing, that we are required to do. And so is there some perception inside the league that registrars and electoral boards are not, doing the things that you listed? Or was that just things that your membership came back with as what they thought were key stepping stones to a successful election?
No, I do not think that they were offering this as a critique of the way elections are being performed. They were simply stating the things that they thought should be, those are essentially standards that they wanted to meet. So it was not a criticism in any way. It wasn't that it's not being done, but that this is what must be done. Yes, Jackie.
So if we pause for just a minute to see what this amazing discussion has been about, what I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I've heard is there are the stepping stones that you're required to do, slam dunk, figure out what they are, list them, measure them. Some of them will probably match the list from the League of Women Voters. Then there's the idea of looking at what other people, organizations, states have done. MIT, University of New Mexico, the book that Lisa mentioned. So that idea was brought up. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's see what others have done to see what we might be able to borrow. And then a third group is we might need to actually move toward surveying voters. So we've got different approaches here, all valuable, that you've discussed, and there seems to be some energy around them. I want to stop and go back though to see if Kim's question was answered. Because Kim, you asked a question about, wait a minute, what are we here to do? And you wanted clarification around that, and I think it's important that we know if the discussion helped to answer your question, Kim.
Yeah.
Yes? or?
Yes, I
Okay.
think we, right. So I'm just thinking we have a twofold objective, right? To do a self, and I put that in the chat that we have a self-assessment to do to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. And then even within that, we may be thinking we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but how does the public feel about their experience? I think we
Okay.
need to do both things. Yeah.
Okay,
So
all right. I just wanted to make sure we didn't leave you hanging. Okay, I'm done.
Lisa, to Jackie's point there, because she was sort of lining out three different we have going on. To go back to the stepping stones, I sort of consider the stepping stones the requirements of the Code of Virginia. If we find that here are all the requirements in the Code of Virginia that we follow to conduct an election, those should lead us to definitive proof that we've conducted a successful election. All the stepping stones in the Code of Virginia should lead us to the fact that we have conducted a successful election. Should we, follow those and be able to prove that we have done everything that's required of us in the Code of Virginia from start to finish, from the start of early voting all the way through the final certification of election. We have done all of that. We have proved that we have done all of that. That is definitive proof that we've conducted a successful election. If we discover that we do all of those things, we prove that we've done all of those things, and that yet there is still this perception that we have not conducted a successful election, then the deficiency is not in the general registrar. The deficiency is not in the electoral board. The deficiency there is in the Code of Virginia. So like that I think that's where we are. If we discover that we do all of the things that are incumbent upon us that are required by law. I see Kate's hand up, but if we do all the things that are required of us that are incumbent upon us, and we still have this perception in the public that the election was somehow not successful, then is the deficiency mine as the general registrar? Where's the deficiency? Because I've done everything that's required.
Allison, that's blasphemy. The code is never wrong.
No, wait, I'm going to call on Kate and then Jackie. Kate? Kate, you're muted.
Kate, you're muted.
Oh, no, there we go. I think that the code does not prescribe how we should go about transparency. That's a hard one to put in the code. You must be transparent. It is not really a code item and does not really tell us, and we must be transparent to have the public confidence. So there are no standards for those kinds of things. The code really thinks about how the mechanisms of how we should go about this with good reason. And if I found in the last election, I must have done 100 Zooms, it seems like, probably not that many, explaining what the code required to various groups that wanted me to explain the code and how we were sure people didn't vote twice and all those things. And when you do that, and that's the transparency part, people go, oh yeah, we can't mimeograph ballots and just send them in. They've got to be attached to something, that kind of thing. So particularly in public outreach and transparency, there's not much in the code, nor will there be, I don't think, that says this is how you do it. And I think that's best practice that we have to come up with to figure out how other states measure those kinds of things. To think about it from what do the voters want to know? It is very complicated, folks, to vote absentee by mail in Virginia.
Yes.
And that much of that complication actually, or some of it, actually ensures the integrity of the vote. And when you explain that, that helps. But there may be ways to ensure the integrity of the vote that are not so complicated. But we haven't gotten there yet. But there's just a whole aspect of public education and transparency that's not really doesn't lend itself to a code item. Thou shalt be transparent is not going to be,
and I was not recommending.
Allison, just a second.
Create code section that requires transparency. I was just saying that through the course of showing that we've done it, it lends itself to the transparency.
Well, if we have shown that we have done the things the code requires, we've shown that we've done the mechanisms, but we also need to have some standards for asking people, did they know what they were doing in various ways?
Yes, and let's say, for example, that the election website could be a whole lot clearer on something. It's not something that the code dictates at all, but that website could be far more user-friendly. Jackie, you had a comment, I believe.
No, I was going to follow up on Allison's comments, and really go back to what Jason was saying, that if every single general registrar and local electoral board does everything by the book perfectly, but you still have people, media outlets who are spreading false information, that's a hard thing, to fight when you're doing your job. So there has to be a way. I'm going back to the hot buttons that Jason talked about. And what we may end up with might be measures. Then again, what we may end up with might be recommendations to improve the website, to explain how absentee balloting works and how it helps with, and why it's tied to integrity, to address the latest hot button issue, whatever it might be, as soon as it's anticipated. So by the book stuff we can measure, but there's a whole bunch of fuzzy stuff that can happen that just strips some people who might be gullible or uncertain of their belief that their vote counted.
Right.
I think what Jason was saying too is a good point. You're fighting the last battle or the last war. But I think if you do this kind of study or measures or whatever, and the more...
We lost you.
Oh, you're muted. Don't know how.
Yep, you're muted, Walt.
No.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think I must be having technical problems here. So like Jason said, he kind of raised the issue of how we're fighting the last battle. But I think the more that if we have this information and the more that's available, I think you kind of set a stage for what the next battle will be over if you have this information on the website. If someone says, well, there's some conspiracy theory that you're doing X, Y, or Z and you're hiding the ball, it's like, wait, you can't say that. Go look at our website and we have all of this information. If we're trying to hide the ball, we wouldn't be showing you all of this information, but we have all of this information here for people to look at. And if it becomes something that's really critical, like, the public says, well, you're not wearing yellow shirts on Friday and you're supposed to be wearing yellow shirts on Friday. Okay, then we'll add that. And I think part of this would be, I think one of the standards needs to be that the state board will, just like with the security plans, we're supposed to look at the security plans 90 days out from the election or something. Before every election, the state board and the staff need to look at these standards and say, okay, what do we need to change? What's going on? What are our goals? Does this measure up? There needs to be constant analysis of the document, and not just like, well, we came up with this in 2015, and so we're just going to cruise along now. It's like, nope, we looked at it. These were some criticisms. We did a debriefing after the primary. This was a problem, and so now we've added that as something we're going to be asking people about in our self-assessment.
Right. Okay, Allison, you have a comment? And then I'd like to move on.
To add to the record, 24.2 105.1 requires the Department of Elections to have a website that is required to contain election results and statistical information. And it goes on to talk about various other things that is defined there, including information about the total number of registered voters and inactive voters. But that code section could be construed to require certain information that might be considered measures, or might be considered required information, or that obviously we could always recommend that code section get changed to require more of what we're looking for out of measures against the Department of Elections and or the State Board of Elections.
Okay, yes, Jackie.
And I think if I can, thank you, Allison, for that. I think as we were talking about the standard required things versus the hot buttons and perception related things, I think Allison made a good point earlier when we start putting the measures together. She said real-time reporting. So that's going to be something important that we look at. If there are those stepping stones and there's a deadline for stepping stone number 1, then report it out on the Department of Elections website that 100% of localities have complied with this and it affects election integrity. That, I think, can go a long way to helping people feel that the process is working for them. So I think that's something that we really need to keep in mind is when we report, don't wait until it's over, report as it happens. But first we have to figure out what those measures are.
Yes, yes. Well, obviously, I mean, we have a little bit of a theme here in terms of transparency. I think a lot of there's an association between transparency and voter understanding of the system. You know, the better, really the second item in my little survey was that voters have to know what they need to do. And of course, it's also when voters have to know what's going on. You know, it's not just them voting, but it's also their perceptions of how the process works. And the clearer it is, the more transparent and the better educated the voters are, the better. And obviously the state's website, which is kind of the go-to point, regardless of where you are in Virginia, can help clarify that. You might have to be directed back to your local registrar, who has to also have a good website, by the way. You know, for example, I believe it was Chesterfield County had a really great little video on how to complete an absentee ballot, how to apply for and complete that ballot and get it back. It was quite brief. It was very clear. And something like that is just a great utility to voters. And these things are qualitative. They can't necessarily be quantified, but they should be measured. And if the point is to keep improving our elections, which is what I believe it is, I'm going to, at Chairman Brink's suggestion, I'm going to poll the other 2 board members and find out what their goals are for the outcome of this thing, because I want to make sure that they will be satisfied with the results. The results, as Walt suggested, might be a menu of things to take going forward. It's not our job to conduct the evaluations. It's our job to set up the evaluation measures. And I was going to try to talk about the terms in our working definition and how we wanted to break that apart and determine what does it mean to be accessible? What does it mean to be efficient? Transparent is the 3rd item. And the 4th is managed with integrity. And that, I think, is what Allison was getting to in terms of following each step of the required procedures. And then I want everyone to plan for the next meeting, if you will. I'd like to wrap up within the next 5 minutes. But think about those 4 things and come up with your own lists. Allison, I think we can take the work product from the Election Benchmark Index work group and make it much more general in terms of the code sections. And we can sort of keep that, set that aside, because those are things we can refer to the codes, but it shouldn't be driven by the codes. It should be, what are the items and which code sections are those satisfying? You know, if you have to have the polls open by a certain time in the morning, that's section 24.2, blah, 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 blah. Rather than just putting code, you know, code section, code section, code section, code section. It should be driven by the process rather than by the law. And to the extent that the law requires the process, you can support that. But I think if we took your work and break that down, it's one item to consider, but it might not be the sole type of measurement. We're going to have other measurements in order to reach these other three things. Accessibility, that's part of the code perhaps. Efficiency, does the code measure efficiency? I'm not sure. Transparency, no, the code does not measure transparency. So these are, and how to measure those things, Charles Stewart said to me jokingly, I believe, that at the bottom of every ballot, there should be a little box that says voter satisfaction survey. And the voter fills that out along with the ballot and sends it in. That, it was really just a joke. I mean, there are ways to survey voters. I know how to do that, and we can pick that up from others. Yes, Allison?
Lisa, my concern here is that again, we are going to be creating standards, creating measures in which local electoral boards, general registrars, the Department of Elections are judged. And I would caution the creation of any kind of measure or standard that within reason does not have some type of foundation in the Code of Virginia. Accessibility, there's code sections for accessibility and requirements for accessibility. And, the only thing here would be, I think that we could not link back to the code. I mean, I hear what you're saying about, not specifically having every single code section listed and having those be individual measures. And that was never the intention of the benchmark work group. That was just the work product that we sort of started with, was what is actually defined in the code. Like what are the code sections and what do they say? And we started there. But I would caution creating measures and standards at which election officials locally are going to be judged that are over and above what is required by the Code of Virginia. Transparency, we can create recommendations for what transparency means and what that would lend itself to transparency. That is certainly something that we can do, and a lot of that can be achieved by what we've already talked about in this meeting, which is utilizing the Department of Elections website for the various things that are the stepping stones of successful elections. But I mean, that is my main caution, is that if registrars are going to be held to standards, or electoral boards are going to be held to standards, those standards should not be over and above what is required of us and our prescribed duties in the Code of Virginia.
This is Barbara. I want to strongly support what Allison just said. We have to understand that especially in the electoral board side of the street, we have to be very specific, and we are driven by the law. We cannot ignore it or cut a corner or decide a process is more important than what we are directed to do under any circumstances. All of us are held legally accountable. I don't know if Lisa told you where I've been this morning and why I was late, but I'm working with the Attorney General's office over a lawsuit against an electoral board member, frankly, who didn't do anything wrong, but the perception was. We have got to be incredibly careful, or we're going to do more harm than we're going to do good. So as I say, I strongly support Allison's comments, and we need to be very, very aware of that. And
if I could just
like
Barbara Tabb, I'm sorry, Walt, just to piggyback on what Barbara Tabb said there, it did remind me of part of the conversation we had in our last meeting, is people can say that they wish we did X or they wish we did Y, but if it's not mandated for us to be able to do it, it is impossible for us to receive funding for things that are not mandated of us to do in a lot of cases. So, the Code of Virginia requires that that it is localities that pay for elections, that it is local governing bodies that fund elections. And, you know, we justify our funding for elections by citing code sections, Lisa, of why that's required and why the governing body must fund that. So while it may be very nice to say that we wish every polling place had an ice cream machine, that is not required in the code, and we're not going to receive funding for that. So we've got to, I mean, just to piggyback on what Barbara said, we've got to be very careful. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to echo that too. I mean, I made the comment about surveying the states, and then Allison made her comment, and I actually had to run off to the restroom. But I think there's a lot to be said for. So I didn't hear the rest of the conversation. I saw Kate grimacing. That was my explanation why I might miss out on some really key points, some epiphany that someone said. But I think there's a lot to that because we're driven by what's mandated in the code. And my county is very good to me and the voters and taking care of the voters and making sure we have what we need in order to do our job. Not all counties and cities are like that. And so if there's going to be something that's like there's a requirement and then there's well, that would be great to have. And I think a perfect example is that Chesterfield video you mentioned. I think I took from that you were impressed that Chesterfield had that video. What I took from that is, why did Chesterfield have to do that video? It's not like Fairfax County had a special absentee process and Chesterfield had a special absentee process. If that video is a good idea, Chesterfield shouldn't get points for doing it. The state should be dinged for not having it. And so that to me is that to me, and I get what you're saying, Lisa. It's just that's where we could get into trouble if we start saying, well, this is a great thing to have. There are some, and some counties and cities don't have a good registrar website. There are some of them that don't even have IT departments.
I agree.
And so that is a big problem too that we're dealing with. And so it's like there are places, and I'm not trying to fault anyone in particular, but I lay this at the feet of the Commonwealth and all of its political subdivisions. I do not understand how a county or city today does not have an IT department.
I want to add one thing.
Okay,
well, let me just finish this.
Go
That
ahead.
was that point. Point two is I actually think that the code does have transparency and it's built all the way through it. Are you letting observers in, or did you tell observers they couldn't come in because you didn't pay attention to the code and you don't know what's going on? Did you send out a notice about LNA testing to the right people? Do your officers have information about the do's and don'ts, what's allowed in the polling place versus not? Is there guidance about the media coming to the polling place? Do you have a sample ballot on your website? Do you have notices for things on your website? You're required to, under the code, if you have a website. But then again, we're back to, you even have an IT department. So all of this stuff kind of feeds together, but the transparency is in the code.
Okay.
And I agree with Allison and Barbara about the requirements, about maybe the standards we look at need to be carefully tailored to what is mandated. And if the state sees another golden bauble that they would like us to perform, fine, make it a requirement so we can say, hey, locality, here's a new golden bauble, and we've got to meet this requirement.
My comment is very, very basic. We have got precincts in the Commonwealth of Virginia that do not have running water and toilets in them. That's how basic some of these localities are. Some of them, in one case that I can think of, is little more than a shed sitting out in the middle of the field. It does have electricity, but that's all. We need to understand that it's not all of us have equal resources. And in fact, they are very unequal. We keep threatening to go and rob Kate all the time. But it's very careful that when we're setting up standards to measure us statewide, that we have to keep in mind these localities that have no resources, that are really, really behind, and because it's going to be hard to hold them accountable.
Okay, I want to make a really basic point, which is the whole purpose of this study is how to improve elections. to answer Allison and Barbara's points, it's not to judge anyone. It's not to be used as a report card for anyone. It's how to improve elections. And you have to think about your audience. Your audience is at the state, at the local level, your local governing body, board of supervisors, council, town, whatever it is. At the state level, you've got the General Assembly and the governor. These are the audience. To improve elections, it's providing ammunition in order to improve elections, and you say we need the resources to do that. And it is, in fact, this study, the results on an annual basis or however it's going to be done, can be used as a communications tool in advocacy for improving resources. And I think that it should be seen not as something to be resisted, but something that all of us should embrace. The voters, the towns, the counties, and all the elections officials, whether they're electoral board members or registrars, or even
Lisa, let me jump in here because I think that part of what we're hearing, I'm the first person to say that please rob me. No, that the difficulty with elections in Virginia is the unevenness of the ability for a system that is supposed to be uniform to do that. It cannot do that. And so if we are going to have standards, for example, something ice cream at the polls, we have to be absolutely clear that if that's a standard, we can't do it statewide. It should not be imposed statewide. I've lived through in the last couple of weeks, people from all over the Commonwealth calling me, asking me questions, and I don't get paid by the state to answer those. And I don't have the answer because my situation is so different. So if we are going to have even relatively uniform elections in this Commonwealth, we have to be sure that there is somebody in charge of the information, the how to do it, the help for electoral boards and registrars. You all may know now as an electoral board member, and I'm going to bitch for a minute here, I cannot even get on the EB list. I'm on the GR list. I can't get on the EB list. They keep trying. So I'm a reappointment this year, and I just got, because some friend sent it to me, that I have to go to training in some time this month. I would have had no way of knowing that. If I get sued, I happen to know how to get a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that of the 399 electoral board members in this Commonwealth, maybe 50 of them know how to go to state risk management and do that.
I'm not sure 50 of them do.
Okay, but what I'm saying here is that if we are going to impose, and I agree with this, we can't establish things that people can't do, that if we are going to say these things, that we maybe have a column of things that would be good to do, but the state either has to fund it or give the localities money to do it. So many of our election offices in this state are not as lucky as Walt said he is and I am. They are not incorporated in their local governments at all. They don't have help. They don't have the publicity aspects that I have for people to make stuff to put on the county's website, which is where Fairfax's is. So we have to recognize right up front that the standards that are in the law, which are time and place sort of things, that you can meet. But if they're going to be expansions of that, or even some of them that can't meet that, we need to comment on that, because this system is really fragile. And it's the only fix for it is at the state level. And while you're at it, when we talk about the number of complaints from jurisdictions, and I see Henrico here, we should have them reported per 100,000 the same way that the vaccinations are, because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to win complaints reported by jurisdiction every single time. It is meaningless. That's just going to be what happens. So we have to think about all of this in terms of what can we judge elections on. I'm so sympathetic to people. People call and say, Kate, can you make the deadline? Well, yeah, I can hire I have what, 1,100 people working by an election time, and we'll just work around the clock. But that's more than the size of some towns. So what can I say? It's just not, it's not sustainable in the future in the way we're doing it. And this
Has a question, has a comment. Kim, Kim, go ahead. You have the floor.
Yeah, I'm just like, this is my first time being on this commission, on this advisory board. I'm a citizen, right? And I do some election work now and then, right? However, I am like totally appalled by some of the things that I'm hearing. If we're talking about, and not blaming, I'm just saying, if there's no consistency and if we're not doing everything that we need to do to make sure the town that has the shack in the middle of the place doesn't have all the resources that they need to conduct an efficient and effective election, then we're behind the 8 ball, right? So I think that's even our starting point, is that we should be boosting every locality that they have everything that they need. And then you can talk about what are we doing right or what are we doing wrong. So if we're starting where you don't even have, so people's experience in that space is going to be poor, right? Unless you can put the resources in there to do what it needs to do. So I'm listening to this and I'm like, what the heck? Like, what do I need to be doing outside of this meeting to make sure that that people understand like how poor it is, right? I'm just like, I'm flabbergasted. I don't even know what to say for that.
So are you
I'm sorry.
suggesting that we do some sort of a baseline where we ask?
But I'm saying, like, what I'm saying is, if we already know there are localities that are already underfunded, under-resourced, under everything, underwater, then we should have our focus where we're at least pulling them up to at least sea level, right? And then go from there. I'm just, who do I need to call? Like my representative, like something, is this ridiculous? I can't even deal with this right now. It's just.
Allison, can we put Kim on our legislative committee?
Yeah, let's do it.
No, I'm going to steal her first.
But no, to answer Kim's question, this work group has a permanent member from VACO and a permanent member from VML. And as I stated earlier, the code requires that local governing bodies fund the electoral process. And I think that was part of the wisdom in creating the advisory work group and having a permanent member from VACO and a permanent member from VML, so that not only are they part of this discussion, but they are informed by this work group about what really is required to conduct successful elections. And Kim, I'm glad that you are shocked and appalled that we have shacks that serve as polling places, because all of us are shocked and appalled. But the reality is that the code only requires that they fund them. It does not require that they fund them in the way in which local registrars or local electoral boards think they should be funded. And there's not a lot of recourse for the general registrar or for the electoral board when they feel like they are underfunded, other than to, go to the media and complain. There's no carrot or stick in this process.
So is that a General Assembly issue? Is that our General Assembly issue, that we need to go to the state and like twist arm, strong arm? I don't know. Is that what we're supposed to be doing to make sure that we are funded?
I think that's one thing that ultimately the goal of the benchmark work group was, for those people who were on that as well as with me, and Lisa, attended several of our meetings. It was the goal of the benchmark, which I guess is the goal of this work group now, is that by eventually creating definitive standards for a successful election, it gives local registrars, local electoral boards, the means in which to say definitively, this is what is necessary. These are the standards we have to meet. This is what we need you to fund. We need you to fund accessible polling places. What's an accessible polling place? Is an accessible polling place a shack with no running water? Is that adequate? Is that sufficient No, it's not sufficient. What if voters need to use the restroom? I mean, forget about poll workers. Who cares about poll workers? Like, we're supposed to be servicing voters and we don't even have restrooms. We don't have a way to wash hands in the middle of a pandemic if there's a locality using a shack. So no, I mean, that ultimately that was always the goal of the benchmark, was to create standards, to create things in which we could show this is what an successful election looks like. This is how we fund a successful election. Here's how we validate that we need staff. So we want to talk about polling places that don't have, that are insufficient. Let's talk about registrar's offices that are insufficient because they don't even have any staff. So
could I jump in a second, Lisa? I want to be much more blunt than Allison was. She was nice. There should never be anything that comes out of the General Assembly that affects an election that is an unfunded mandate. When we see legislation that comes out and says there is no financial impact, that's baloney. It may mean the state's not paying for it, but there are localities who last year and this year had to make a decision to take money out of their school budgets or away from a police officer or some other infrastructure project to be able to pay for a minimal election. And that's what they had, was minimal staff. There should never, ever, and that's what we should be at least talking with all of our General Assembly members about, in my opinion.
Okay.
Hi, Jess, I haven't had a chance
Sorry,
to speak.
Barbara, to cut you off. I think Jess has a comment.
Yes. Hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yes. So as the representative that Allison referred to from VML, and I know my colleague Katie Boyle wasn't able to join us today. She's actually in the middle of running her own webinar right now. Yes, funding is a severe issue, and the fact that localities vastly differ in their overall budgets and their ability to fund these necessary things to run, reasonable and effective elections is extremely problematic. And so yes, I would say that part of the goal here should be to go to the General Assembly and say that we can no longer support unfunded mandates to continue improving the quality of our elections. And no, we cannot increase the standards statewide without additional federal financial support.
So you're in support then of the Registrars Association and the Electoral Board Association. You can make common cause with them. Is that right?
Yes, and we frequently do. Yes.
Okay, now a question for Barbara and Allison as presidents of your respective organizations. Do you have data on the resources or the shortcomings, whatever it is? Do you have information from all 133 localities that this work group could use?
You want to go first, Allison?
Already in the box.
Okay, we in the electoral board world, no, we do not. We can do some surveys. We can get that. We have obviously where we are polling and particular topics, but we can get those information. We know precincts, we know voter numbers, we know, line numbers, many of those things, but we have not measured a lot of the measurements that I think we would need if we're going to make a concerted effort with the General Assembly.
Okay, I mean, the purpose of this organization, of this work group, is not to become a lobbying arm of anybody or an advocacy organization. We're here to come up with measurements for improving elections in order to measure what's successful. But to have this kind of information, we can use it to help out.
I see Walt and Kate both trying to speak.
Kate, you're muted, but the previous GREB work group labored to get the costs of elections, and this proved to be a bit of a sticking point.
Yes.
Because I think at the time we were discussing a lot of, this is what it costs to send out cages and stuff with election supplies and all of that. And I think that's part of an election. But part of what is being discussed here are the things that are year-round expenses, which I think are, if you're going to look at the cost of an election, you can't just look at, well, we started spending some money in September. No, I mean, because the election is a year-long thing. So, for example, the shed, the shack or whatever, you know, wherever these places are, the staffing, that's year-long. So how much does a locality spend on staffing, or, you know, are there existing facilities, you know, public buildings that can be used as polling places? And that financial information already exists. The auditor of public accounts collects it, and they collect the line item details for, does it break it out? Like, this is how much, you know, assistant registrar number 1 was paid? No. It would be nice to have all of that information, but it has the top line cost for election line items with the APA, his or her office,
Yeah.
And then I think it would be good if we wanted to look at costs. I mean, I think like Lisa, you said, we don't want to become too much of lobbying, but I think I've always thought that part of the standards here are not just like, well, did the registrar and the electoral board and the officers get out of bed in time, but also, well, did we have enough money to print ballots? One story that'll tell you what we're dealing with. A registrar colleague of mine, who I will not name, had money left over in her budget, and they were running short. And in January or February, her budget office contacted her and said, can we have some of your money to help cover our shortages in other parts of the county budget? And the registrar said, yes, you can, but I have a primary possibly in June, so I may need it back. And her budget department said, we're not sure you can have a primary.
No, I've heard this. It's quite a story.
But can I follow up on Walt? Because Walt, I will agree with you that while I think the cost of an election, our last one cost us, counting all that stuff you mentioned, $4 million. And that's more than the office budgets for practically everybody else on here combined, except for Henrico. But the interesting part here is that Walt's exactly right. That data, and it's not so much cost, it's spend. It's what jurisdictions spend on stuff. Because, and this year it was enormous because we want to know what we spend on it, because a lot of it's PPE and a bunch of other things. So we got to be careful. But that data exists. And you can, let me go to the per capita again. You can figure out what that is per capita in terms of what it spends. Otherwise, you're going to get a kind of a, you're going to miss the jurisdictions that may be small and are spending lots of money per capita, because the big jurisdictions are always going to spend more, and that may not be enough. So that data exists, and nobody has ever called out, because that other group was disbanded, the fact that there is such a discrepancy among the jurisdictions on what people are spending on elections. And I think that there should be a standard. If we can figure out what it is, we can put this into a successful election, that jurisdictions have invested enough to perform a special election. I think we can come up with a standard like that. It'll be hard, but we can try.
Sorry, and this
All
is
right.
Jessica. And
Well, if we can get that data, that would be very helpful. I'm sorry, Jess, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that to piggyback off of what both Kate and Walt had to say, and Lisa, to your point that you're making before, that this, you know, the goal of this body is certainly not to lobby, and I think we all recognize that, but to the end that we're hoping to establish standards that are achievable, I think we do need to ensure that, you know, our registrars have the resources in which to, and, you know, the Department of Elections, et cetera, that everyone has the resources to be able to achieve those standards.
And they need
Otherwise,
to go to municipalities, not just the state office.
Okay.
right. Thanks, Barb. Or thanks, Kate.
Okay. I think that we should sort of work toward our timeline if we want to have a report ready for October. next month, I really want to focus on determining the measurement methodology. And we also need a date for our June meeting. I know that there's a primary on June 8th, and we were not going to use the second Tuesday as a result. So do you want to set a date for the June meeting? Does anyone have a suggestion for that?
The 13th.
You want to do it on the 15th, which is the following Tuesday?
That would work for me, assuming everybody is, I mean, because that certification deadline, so there may be we may have localities that would have problems.
I think that Tuesday is for me, it's a no-go.
Me
Because
too.
I don't know what I'm dealing with as far as the weekend and voters' ballots coming in on Friday. And then I don't mean to sound like this, but the board goes home and we look at reports and then they come back on Tuesday and sign them.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
So it's just tight for scheduling.
Yeah, agreed.
Actually, the 22nd is a state board meeting at 1. Or we could do it any other day that week, later in the week. Would that be all right? Or is it not all right to do it the week of the 14th?
I would be fine after that Tuesday. That's for now.
And I'm not fine on that Wednesday.
Let's.
Okay, how about Thursday? Could I have a show of hands for Thursday?
I can't do Thursday.
Thursday, which, could you just repeat the date, not just Thursday?
The 17th.
Thursday, the 17th of June at 10 a.m.
Thank you.
Okay. Tim, okay? Yes. All right. So that's our next date.
Oh, I'm
June
good.
17th.
I don't have all the hard work like you guys do. I'm not working a registrar's office, so I'm free. Anytime is good.
But
But
what
just so
that
you
means
know,
is what that means is that Kim can bring us some of this ice cream that Allison talked about.
well, actually, I'm working for someone, so probably not. But June 8th is my birthday, so let's make it a great election day. Okay? How about that?
Okay.
So we're on for the 17th. Is that what we've decided?
Yes, 10 o'clock.
And so our regular
And in May, the next meeting is the 11th, May 11th. So I'm going to be in touch with everyone and try to nail down what we're going to accomplish in terms of starting to deal with these measurements. If we could get some of this data that we've been discussing about what the resources are or what the costs are of elections, that would be very helpful. And we can also look at the code requirements, but we also need to look again at the ultimate outcome in terms of the voter confidence in the elections and the voter understanding of the process, to make it as easy as possible for voters to vote, which is something that I mentioned at the beginning, at the outset.
Jess, do you or Katie, have you updated your survey that you did of the APA's reports on the election line items?
No, we haven't had a recent survey. And there's a broader, I can't speak for VACO, that VML is a broader conversation about surveys in general. So no, we don't have updated information.
So basically the information we have is out of date.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's not out of date. It's just that the auditor doesn't say, oh, and here's how much all the localities spend on elections. So you've got to go look at each. I believe what they had to do is go look. I mean, maybe the auditor could pull it. I don't know. If we called the auditor or emailed them and said, hey, can you give us how much is spent on elections, for each locality, they might be able to do that. I suspect they could. But I think what VACO and VML did is they had gone through the auditor's reports for each locality, pulled the number and put it into a spreadsheet. But maybe the auditor could do that for us. I would think that in 2021 they could.
Can I ask, which year is that? If we've got data now, do we have data from 2020 yet? Has anybody?
Probably not, because the books haven't closed yet. And
That's
so
right.
they won't be auditing those until probably, I can't remember when they usually do it, but probably this fall. So the most recent year, I'm guessing the auditor has it for is the year that ended July 1, 2020.
Yeah,
That's my
that's,
guess.
I
that's
don't
gonna,
know if we're looking for actual for really finite numbers. I think we're looking for proportions and relationships.
yeah, but
Relativity.
I don't think we can get proportions and relationships if we don't look for finite numbers in relationship to population and do a mathematical calculation there.
Right, but what if we had the numbers for 2019?
No, no. No,
Last
world-
year changed the game.
the world changed.
Yep.
The world changed dramatically. If we have 2019, it's our whole budget was $4 million that year. And then when election cost us that, but 2020, the year that ends in 2020 will at least include the presidential primary, the primary in June, and a lot of preparation that we had to do to get ready for November already. So those costs will be up in that year. It'll be closer. But 2019 is not even relevant anymore. That was in the last.
It's just the basic of 45 days of voting.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that you know, the APA's report from fiscal year 20 would show us would be that there was disparity between the fund levels of counties. But like Kate points out, that everyone should remember is that the fundamental bedrocks of election administration changed July 1 of 2020 when House Bill 1 went into effect, and we essentially created 45 days of early voting and guaranteed voting. It is a fundamental change to election administration, and there's literally no way to compare fiscal year 2021 to anything previous, because it really was you know, just a massive change in scale of what the footprint is of elections.
But 2020 will be closer than 2019. I mean, it's still, we can get relationships, but I don't know how we get at that. I don't know who's reported it. You know,
FY20 will include the November 2019 election all the way through the presidential preference primary, Maytown elections, the June primary in 2020. But it's still not a good comparison to FY 2021.
Right.
Well, then is this, I mean, is this an avenue not worth pursuing? I was just simply trying to develop a way of finding out what the disparities are. Because I could also argue that 2020 was an anomaly for a lot of reasons. First of all, we had an exceptional number of elections. Secondly, we had huge changes. And thirdly, we had a pandemic, which also involved changes. And fourthly, there were also federal funds that were brought in. I mean, it's almost an anomaly or it is an anomaly, that election. So
the pandemic made number of elections is not.
well, I think 2020 is better to use than 2020 if we have it. It's better to use than 2019. It's not as good as 2021, but we don't have it. I agree with your point that the most recent one we've got will show the relationships, but it won't show the increases as much as if you go back to 2019.
Okay, all right. Jess, do we have any unaudited information that could help? I'm just trying to get basic baseline. That's all I'm interested in at this point.
No, VML wouldn't be the venue for that. We don't have that data.
Okay.
That would be the what Walt was talking about, to call the audit.
And we would have to make a request. Lisa, it may be more official if you, as chair of the work group, make an official request to the auditor of public accounts for that information.
Okay. Is it worth doing? before doing.
Regardless of what year you look at, you'll see disparity between localities if you
I just
compare localities of size.
I just sent an email, just typed up and sent an email to these two people who work on local government, the APA. So it's gone.
Okay.
So we'll see if they can just spit out the numbers and help us.
And the disparities may fluctuate from year to year, but I imagine that disparities don't necessarily just dematerialize from year to year. The places that are under probably continue underfunded for years and years at a time. So it's worth whatever you think that kind of thing would be worth. I mean, that's my opinion.
Okay. All right. I'll come back with a proposal on that. I suggest that we're done for the day and we can come up with a plan for the entire process. I know what we're going to be doing for the next meeting, pretty much determining the measurement methodology, but then we have to start doing our homework in terms of what other states are doing, and then pulling together a report, because we only have a few months in to do all of that.
Lisa, do we still have public? Because I think you need to call public comment if we still have.
Yes, that was the final thing that I'm going to do. It's on the agenda. I need to open this up. Public comment. Does anyone have anything that they would wish to say? I did note that there was a comment in the chat from Audrey Malagon of Verified Voting, saying that she wanted to add that the risk limiting audits that the state is doing will provide statistical evidence of accuracy on vote tabulation. And I think we already accounted for that in some of the standards that were mentioned before, in terms of pre and post-election auditing the process. Okay, so without public comment, we can adjourn the meeting. And it's been very nice talking to you today. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good seeing everyone.
Sorry I'm so late in getting started. I apologize.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
How do I get out of here?